Einen wunderschönen guten Abend und herzlich willkommen zum DOK.fest at Home. Sie haben uns ja schon ein bisschen zugeguckt. Hoffentlich haben wir nichts allzu Peinliches gesagt. Mein Name ist Christina Wolf und ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie zugucken. Und neben mir ist Monika Haas, die am Computer sitzt und hoffentlich wieder Ihre Kommentare und Ihre Fragen einsammelt.
In unserem Chat, der parallel läuft.
Der Film, über den es jetzt geht, wir sprechen ja mit dem Regisseur gleich, ist mit Sicherheit der Film mit dem besten Soundtrack. Ich glaube, das kann man auf jeden Fall behaupten. Es ist ein großartiger Film für Fans von The Band und er heißt Once Were Brothers und ich freue mich jetzt sehr, in Toronto den Regisseur begrüßen zu dürfen. Welcome, Daniel Roher.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with you.
We are talking to you in Toronto. You're at your parents' house. How's the situation in Canada? How are you doing with the virus? How's life?
Well, everything's fine. You are coming to me, or I'm coming to you rather, from my brother's childhood bedroom. So it's very nostalgic for both of us. Things in Toronto are, I like to say, everything is fine considering nothing's fine. Now that the weather's starting to get nice, I think people are getting a little bit antsy. They want to go to the lake. They want to be able to go up north, and they want to go to the park. But, you know, we're very fortunate that Canada, relatively speaking, is doing very well, and I'm grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, we would be so absolutely happy if you could join us for the film, for the premiere here in Munich.
Sure.
I would love to know about the world premiere of Once Were Brothers, because that was in Toronto. If I'm not mistaken, it was the first documentary to ever be the opening film of the festival. Tell us about it.
Well, I grew up in Toronto, and the most important cultural event in Canada is the Toronto International Film Festival. And so to be from here, it is the dream of any filmmaker to have a film premiere at TIFF. That's number one. And that was always our dream and our objective, was to have the film premiere at TIFF. And when the festival decided to have our film be the opening night gala film, it's kind of unbelievable. You know, it's one of these things I tell people, it's not a dream come true because I never dreamed it was possible. It was so beyond anything we anticipated. And for me, it was such an extraordinary, incredible event. It was the premiere itself. It's one of these things that is, in so many ways, a life-defining event that is over in 6 hours. But it was very exciting. You know, you feel like a celebrity for 5 minutes. There are people asking you for their autograph. There's a big red carpet. I'm standing there with Martin Scorsese and Ron Howard. And it's very, there's pomp and circumstance, and it's very exciting. But at the end of the day, it was sort of like, just another unique experience that I'm grateful that I had. Back to work on to the next film.
Yeah. I mean, you've already mentioned Martin Scorsese and Ron Howard. We're going to talk about the very, very famous names that are included in that film. But as a first question, when it comes to the film itself, when did you fall in love with the band? I know it has something to do with your dad and canoeing.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. So I grew up here in Toronto, and every summer, my dad, my brother, and I would go up to Algonquin Park, which is one of our big provincial parks here in Ontario, and we would go on a canoe trip. So we'd pack all of our camping gear into the canoe, and we'd paddle out. And I have very distinguished memories of doing creek paddling. So you're paddling through these little creek beds, and there are lily pads everywhere and frogs, and it's quite stunning. And one of our distinguished songs of that whole time was Up on Cripple Creek by the band. And it seemed like this music always captivated a really special part of my life. It's like, to quote Bruce Springsteen in our film, it's like something that had always been there, but I'd never heard it before. And amongst the canon of Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan, the band always resonated as, the most unique, interesting, fantastic story songs that I really fell in love with from a young age.
And how does a 26-year-old, that's what I think your current age now, a fan of the band, end up making a documentary with Robbie Robertson, about his autobiography testimony? How did that all, happen?
Well, I was 23 when I got the job. And that was really just a question of looking at what I had to offer and what my deficits were, and how to build a bridge between these two things. So I didn't have the most prestigious CV. I didn't have so many prestigious credits or so many awards that I've won or anything like this. But what I had was this burning, hot, red passion to make this film. I had convinced myself, once Robbie's book came out and I devoured it, that it would make an extraordinary documentary project, and I would have done whatever it would have taken to make that film, to be the director of that film. It was my absolute dream. I knew that. It then became a question of convincing everyone else of that. Yeah. And I wasn't the most obvious choice, but what I lacked in my prestigious CV, I made up for in this passion and energy I brought to the table. And I always maintained that if I could just go talk to Robbie, and if I could sit across from him, how could he not give me the job? And inevitably, after lobbying and communicating with anyone who would listen here in Canada, I had the chance to go and meet Robbie in Los Angeles. And I said to him, you know, I'll die before your movie's not fucking awesome. I'm going to make the best thing I could possibly make. I promise you that. And I think that's something that really resonated with him. And I found out later that he found a version of his younger self in me, in that energy and spirit. And I think that's why he was comfortable to hire someone who might have been a little bit more of a risk factor than a more established filmmaker.
Mm. You've mentioned Ron Howard, Martin Scorsese, and you have interviewed Bruce Springsteen for the film. Van Morrison is in there, and so many big names. How did that happen? I mean, I imagine once you have one of them, maybe it's like a snowball and then everything works, but talk us through it, please.
Well, I think that's a good metaphor, but at the end of the day, it's just about, for this, it was really just about vision and growth. When we set out to make this movie, it was my dream to make something that would go around the world, that would show all over Europe and all over North America and all over the place. But that's different from actually having that happen. We had very modest resources. When we started, we were making a very small Canadian film, which is different from what it became. But it was always my dream to make this big, expansive music documentary. And what happens is you get one person, as you said, Bruce Springsteen's in it. And then, you know, every month or two, I go to Northern Ireland to meet with Van Morrison, or I go to, LA to meet with, who else would be in the film, David Geffen, or New York to be with Scorsese. And slowly the dominoes fall and the film comes together, and you're editing as you're shooting. And it's a very unusual process, but it's guided by this singular passion and energy that was the consistent motivating factor since the very beginning.
Since we're talking about Martin Scorsese, of course, he has a very special connection to the band because he shot, you know, the very famous film, The Last Waltz, about their, you know, beautiful concert, the last concert they played together in San Francisco. How big was the inspiration, The Last Waltz, Scorsese's documentary about the band?
Well, that film, I mean, is such an incredible piece of work in its own right. And over the course of making this film, so many people have made comments like, it must be intimidating to have to do the follow-up to The Last Waltz or the sequel to The Last Waltz. And I never felt like that's even remotely what I was doing. The Last Waltz is a totally different thing. It's its own beast. And I grew up with that film. I watched it when I was in high school with you know, it was like, who are these guys? You know, it's like, it is myth making. These guys are incredible, and you want to know more about them. But my film was very different. I think The Last Waltz does a good job of building the myth of who these guys were. And I think what my film does a little bit more is it deconstructs that myth. And it spends a little bit more time focusing on where they came from and what inspired them.
Falls Sie gerade erst zu uns finden hier in diesem Q&A. Wir sprechen hier mit Daniel Roher, der den großartigen Film Once Were Brothers gemacht hat über The Band, die großartige Band, die unter anderem ja auch damit bekannt wurde, dass sie Bob Dylan unterstützt haben, dass sie quasi seine Band waren. Und wenn Sie Fragen haben, dann bitte immer her zu uns, in den Chat hineingeschrieben, and then we will pass the questions on to you, Daniel. Was it clear from the very beginning that you would use some of the material from The Last Waltz?
Absolutely. The Last Waltz is such an important part of the band's story, but more than that, of Robbie's story. So for us, it was just a question of how do we weave this into the film in a way that is recontextualizing the footage in an intelligent way that elevates it and makes it different from its original context.
Mm. I read, of course, about your film and about the North American premiere and how fans reacted to the film. And how much did you expect the band fans to be? You know, of course, they're very, it's a controversial topic for them if you tell Robbie's story. How much did you expect that?
Well, from the get-go, I understood at every part of this that there was some inherent controversy to this story, because there is this rift in the fandom of the legacy of this group, where there's one side versus the other, and this is an old trope and narrative that has sort of enveloped the legacy of this group. But one thing that was very clear for me is that I was not hired. My job was not to make a film about the band. My job was to make a film about the band through the perspective of Robbie Robertson. And that's a very different undertaking than if I was hired to make a film about the band itself. That would have been a very different project. So it's just a question of understanding that this is one perspective, and Robbie is, it's his story. He's entitled to tell his story. I'm grateful that he trusted me to help him tell his story. And any fan of the band should read Robbie's book, read Levon's book, watch Robbie's doc, watch Levon's doc. But at the end of the day, what I always maintain is that this conflict is really irrelevant. What matters is the music. I'm not going to be talking about this rift, in 50 years with my grandchildren. I'm just going to play them the night they drove Old Dixie down, and it's going to feel the exact same way, with the same power and emotionality as it did when I first heard it when I was, 12 years old.
How much influence did Robbie have on, the archive material, of course, and the editing, and how much was he involved?
Robbie's biggest influence was his commitment to excellence. Robbie wants it, whatever he touches, whether it's an album or a score or a documentary or a book, to be as good as it can possibly be, and he doesn't care what it takes. And that spirit and energy that he brought to the table was matched by my own perfectionism. It would not be anything less than as good as we could get it. And so that's one way he really inspired the process, this commitment to excellence. But by and large, for the first year of production, I went and just made the movie. He didn't see anything. He knew that we were making it. He was very committed that the way this relationship works is I just have to go make the film I want to make. He's friends with filmmakers. He understands how this collaboration works. And I'm grateful for that, because it's a very scary thing to just trust somebody with your legacy, with your story.
What is he like? I imagine you spend so many hours talking to him, and I think he's such a marvelous storyteller. The way he speaks, and even for us who are not, non-native English speakers, for us it's so, I think I want to learn English with him because he speaks so beautifully. And what was he like? What was the situation like? How much did you talk to him, and how much time did you spend together?
Robbie and I have spent a lot of time together over the course of making the film and then promoting the film. We've spent a good amount of time together. Listen, he's a rock star. He's the coolest guy in every room he enters in, and you know it and he knows it. But he's very generous insofar as that he likes to share stories. I can sit there, as you pointed out, and listen to the man talk forever, but he also wants to be like, what's motivating you? What are you excited about? What are you listening to? What are you watching? He likes to hear what I'm doing, and I appreciate that. But ultimately, our relationship, I think, is really predicated on a mutual respect for one another's work. He's a legend. His songs, you forget that he's this genius songwriter, because he's just this dude who I'm hanging out with. And similarly, there was this moment when he watched the rough cut of the film and it really clicked, and he's like, you made that? This is all right. This is working for us. This is really great. And so ultimately, I think we have a healthy respect for one another, which just has to do with the work, which matters most to both of us.
There's one other member of the band who's still alive, and Garth isn't in there. There's not a current interview with him. Why not?
I shot a current interview with Garth. I went down to Woodstock, and he's where he lives now, and I filmed an interview with him. which was the most bizarre experience probably in my professional life, going to film that interview. Well, Garth is, if anyone knows the band and is a fan of the group, knows that Garth has always beat to his own drum. He's a very unique, idiosyncratic guy. You know, he's almost like a savant, this brilliant, extraordinary musical mind, but perhaps in other social capacities, he is a little bit different from someone like Robbie Robertson. And so meeting Garth today is quite challenging because he's quite elderly and his health isn't doing very well. And so we did shoot an interview with him, but he wasn't as articulate and lucid as he was when he was younger. And consequently, we decided to err on the side of those younger, older archival interviews so he can still have a voice. But really, when it comes to a man like Garth Hudson, it's not beneficial to ask him what he felt about something or ask him what he thinks about this. What you really want to do is to sit him behind an organ or a piano and just have him play you music, because that's how he communicates with the world best.
Has he seen the film?
I can't speak to that. I don't know. I'm really not sure. It's not easy to get in touch or correspond with him.
Do we have anything you want to share?
I have a question, but you already somehow answered it. But I repeat it. I'm surprised to see such a young filmmaker. How did you get in touch with the band? And quota is, thank you for the great movie.
Oh, thank you.
I think you've already kind of answered it. But
but maybe you can repeat.
What was the question? I actually didn't hear it. Can you just reiterate it quickly?
Yeah, the question is, how did you get in touch with the band?
As such a young filmmaker, especially.
Sure. Well, Robbie's book came out. I devoured it. I read it cover to cover, in a week. I thought it was incredible. And I wrote this treatment, this very extensive document that essentially laid out my vision for what I thought this film should be. And I sent that all around Canada, all around Toronto. And eventually it made its way to Robbie, and I understand they had a filmmaker hired to do it originally, but it wasn't the right energy between Robbie and that filmmaker, and they needed somebody else. I went to meet with Robbie, and it was like a very good match, and we really hit it off, and he liked me and I liked him, and we decided to work together then.
Thank you. There are of course heavy topics that your film touches when it comes to mental health, addiction problems, of course. Have you ever thought about not including that, or how to do that? It's a very sensitive subject, how to deal with it.
Well, it's incredibly sensitive, and something that was not lost on me was the fact that while I was making the film, I had my first cousin died of a fentanyl overdose in the midst of production. And it was just this shocking reminder about how drug addiction is a terrible, deadly disease, and it must be regarded like any other disease. Unfortunately, when Robbie and the band were young men in Woodstock, and some of his friends were struggling with substances, there was no lexicon to describe this as a disease. It was looked upon as a personal failure, like, oh, Richard's being irresponsible, or Levon's not holding up his end of the bargain. And the reason it was so important to put it in the film is to remind people how pressing and critical these issues are, and how important it is to look at these things as they must be looked upon in the modern context of serious health issues.
You talk about Levon's death, but that's the only death actually you cover. You decided not to talk about the suicide, for example. Yeah. Why not? Richard's suicide.
Yeah, it's such a challenging thing. The reality is, you can make an entire film just about Richard Manuel and just about his death. For us, in the last 10 minutes of the movie, to talk about Richard's death in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, to me, felt disrespectful. And it was the type of thing that people who want to seek out the story will go read about it and learn more. But it was very obtuse in the ending of our movie, and it never really quite fit. And ultimately, I didn't think it was befitting to the film we had crafted.
Yeah. You just interrupt me anytime you want to say
I
something,
will,
of course.
I will.
I'm curious, of course, about this huge amount of archive material that you used. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you get the archive materials? How much was it? Did you put everything you found in the film, or is there even, do you still have 10 hours of unpublished material? How did you select?
I'm very much an archival director. Something that really inspires me and motivates me about being a documentary filmmaker is just this dream or idea that my next film is in some storage locker or some shoebox in someone's closet in little cassette tapes that I don't even know about yet, waiting to be uncovered like buried treasure. And it was really in that spirit that I took on the majority of the archival work for this movie. And so for me, that really meant cultivating personal relationships with photographers, widows of photographers, estates, lawyers of photographers, to be able not to see what's on Getty Images, but to go to the storage locker of David Garr in upstate New York, to be able to look through his 3 days shooting with the band and the thousands of outtakes that have never been published, or to befriend the son of David Addy, the very talented New York photographer. And, I'm grateful that his son Eli has since become, a dear friend of mine. He's in LA, and his dad shot with the band for an afternoon. These exquisite photo shoot that no one had seen before. And the way that I was really able to find these pieces of archive that no one had seen before is by going to the places, going to the archives, bringing my scanner, and really doing the work at that detailed level. I found thousands and thousands of pieces of material. A lot of stuff made into the movie and a lot of stuff didn't, but it's just the amount of material is quite mind-boggling. If I actually close my eyes and think about everything we found, there's just so much, and it takes so much time to just figure out what image goes in what place, and it takes an incredible amount of time to take that archive, the tens of thousands of materials within it, and craft it into this evocative story.
Could you name the most precious gem you found?
So I had about 13 hours last probably March in Robbie's storage locker in LA. And it's just this big dark room. There are no lights. We had to bring in flashlights, and it's like a rock and roll museum. Mm-hmm. It's like a rock and roll garage sale. It's filled with shit, top to bottom. And me and my buddy went in there and we pulled everything out, and we went through every single nook and cranny. And in the span of 13 hours, I found 3 negatives at the bottom of a legal storage cabinet where the drawers pulled out. And it was 3 negatives. And the photographs were a picture of Levon's crashed Jaguar. It's his car in the parking lot. It's all banged up. And then it's him standing in front of the car. And then the tow truck is pulling it away. And he's standing there dejected with his head down. And the 3 shots in sequence tell the entire story of what's going on in this world. And as soon as I found, the 14 hours of digging were completely vindicated. The second I found those photographs, I knew exactly where they were going. And they were just so evocative and beautiful images that had never been seen before. And just as a side note, Elliott Landy, the photographer.
Yeah, we had him here last year at our festival.
Oh, amazing.
So
Elliott's an incredible guy. And he reached out to me at some point. We had a discussion. He thought that those were his photographs, his negatives that he had sent to Robbie. And so I needed to send them back to him. And I went through the sequence, and in the 6th shot, Levon's standing there, and there's another man standing beside him. And if you zoom in, you can tell it's Elliott Landy.
Ha,
so
okay.
He did not take the pictures because he was in the picture.
Or he used a remote, maybe. You talked about Garth being very, what did you say? Savant, a very different person. Yeah. We have to talk about another man who's pretty famously very special, Bob Dylan, and a person who's very, I might call him media shy, if that's a nice wording. And I thought, to be honest, you didn't dare write to Bob Dylan because you know that he's not going to say anything. But you actually were in contact, and he and his management or whoever, they helped you for the film.
Yeah. So, Dylan, what I learned making this movie more than anything is that in the canon of popular music of the 20th century, popular rock and roll, and folk music, there's Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and Crosby, Stills and Nash and the band and, even like the Rolling Stones, and there's everybody over here. And then up here, there's Bob Dylan on another level. And he will certainly go down as one of the distinguished geniuses, like a Shakespeare or an Einstein or something like this. And I came to appreciate that better. And of course, he doesn't do interviews. His whole thing is being an enigma, a myth, an invention of a manifestation. I don't know that the guy even really exists, but maybe he does somewhere. Anyway, we couldn't actually get him for the movie, but his office and his manager were super helpful in giving us access to archives and historical support and things like this. And I think the greatest compliment that I received from this film, and a lot of incredible people have pat me on the back and told me they really enjoyed it. But before it premiered, Robbie's manager sent it to Jeff Rosen, Bob Dylan's manager. Mm-hmm. And Bob Dylan's manager, flipped it to Dylan himself, just to be like, hey, check this thing out. You can watch a couple minutes if you're interested. And what I heard is that Dylan watched the first 10 minutes, loved it so much that he watched it in its entirety. And he called Robbie for the first time in many years. And he was like, hey man, loved your movie. And specifically, I really loved seeing your mom in the movie. I remember having lunch with your mom when we were 22 and 25 in Toronto when we were passing through on that tour. And that was really a lovely memory. And I think that was very touching for both of them to be remembering these wonderful things.
Yeah. I'd love to see a picture of Bob Dylan watching your film. That would be
me too.
Beautiful. How he's, I don't know, the setup Bob Dylan has at home for watching films. Do we have a question?
The question is, I assume that during your research, you also go to the original locations like Woodstock. And
yes.
How was that?
Woodstock is a wild place. It's this really charming little town, very interesting place. But for me, what was even more exciting than Woodstock was going back to the Pink House, where the band and Dylan made the basement tapes and where music from Big Pink bears its namesake. And that was really cool because it's in that space that you can really picture the guys running around in the backyard and smoking cigarettes on the porch and going down into the garage basement to record their music. And there's just it's like any space when you go to some sort of place where something extraordinary happened and the energy is in that place. You can feel it in the air. That's what Big Pink was like for me.
Anything else you want to say?
So far.
I mean, we kind of touched on the subject in the beginning, but still, and I don't want to sound like an old person condescending a young filmmaker. But it's so impressive, all these people you got involved in the project. And if I tell a friend from film school that you will make a documentary film and Martin Scorsese will be the executive producer and Ron Howard will be involved and all those people, how did you do that? I mean, how does that work? Was that pure luck? How did you get these people?
Listen, I'm mystified by the whole process myself. And if you forget your friend from film school, if you told me that those people would be on my film, I wouldn't believe you. How does it happen? I can't answer the question. It's like a mystery of the universe. It was the right time. It was like preparation, hard work at the crossroads of luck, and those things came together. And that's how the process went down. I'm sure I'll never do it again. I'm sure it'll never happen again on one of my films. Doesn't matter to me. It's very exciting and humbling, but I very much view it as this like glitch in the matrix. It's like, don't really believe that's like, I have the pictures. I was with those guys. They came in the premiere, like their names are on the movie. Yeah. It's just a kind of, people are amazed by it. They think it's extraordinary. And for me, I'm very much like, I don't know how to metabolize it. It's like, yeah, that was very amazing. It was very cool. It's very exciting that happened. And I don't really believe it. And I'm ultimately just glad that those guys like the movie. That means more to me than anything else.
Does that push you as a young filmmaker? Being surrounded by, such experienced people. I mean, what is the balance of, being totally under pressure and feeling, validated?
The pressure is intense. I have a lot of confidence in my abilities, in my work, and in my vision, but I'm not motivated by Martin Scorsese or Ron Howard. I'm motivated by wanting to make the best possible thing I can possibly make, whether I have a fancy executive producer or not. And I think that could partially be part of the reason why those guys wanted to be involved, is because they understood that. My motivation in filmmaking is to make the best piece of work I can always. And whether it's got fancy executive producers or it does not, my job and my ambition is always the same. So that wasn't changed when these people got involved. It was always very much guided by my passion and energy. It's like pretty fucking intimidating to send your film to Scorsese. Like, there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, it's like, that's just the way it works. And, I'm glad that he, for the most part, liked it.
I have to ask you about Ronnie Hawkins, because I think he has the best punchlines in the film. And I laughed, I think, at least 10 times very loudly. And I don't even have a question about him. Just tell me about him. What is he like? I imagine he's the funniest guy on the planet.
Ronnie he's unbelievable. He's a character. He's like an original. There's only one Ronnie Hawkins. And he's very much one of these guys who exists in another period of time. It's been like, he is a time machine back to the 1950s and the 1960s, and that's very much the spirit of how he lives his life. And he's just a character. He's like, him on camera is him in real life. There is no gap. He's funny, he's charming, he's generous with his time, and for an older guy, he's really with it, and he's the funniest part of the movie. And he's famous for his double punchlines, that he'll say one funny thing and then he'll lean in a little closer and deliver the next punchline. And it's just, as a filmmaker, it's a wonderful subject and a great part of the movie.
And he's a very dirty old man. I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very much like different. There's a big generational gap. The way I talk, my language, the way I talk about,
women, maybe.
Well, I suppose that's like, he just has a different, there's a line in the movie that's very inappropriate. I'm sure you can think of the one I'm describing.
You can say that, it's fine. I mean, I know what you're talking about. I think about
Ronnie Hawkins
money make in a band. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. So Ronnie Hawkins, basically, the context is Robbie Robertson, says, Ronnie Hawkins gives Robbie the job, and then Robbie says, fantastic, how much money am I going to be making? And Ronnie says, you're not going to make much money, but you're going to get more pussy than Frank Sinatra. And there was a discussion of, like, should we cut that line out? Because every audience might not perceive it the way it was, intended, or the way it would have been thought of, 50 years ago. But my point was, we can't woke wash history. I think people will hear that line and perceive it in the time it was said, and understand that that's not appropriate now. And that's certainly not something I would say or think. And if someone said that to me, I would be really taken aback and find it very uncomfortable. But you can't watch the movie, and I'm glad we left it in, because it always resonates with audiences.
And it's exactly as you said, because I think, if I remember right, he says that, and then he leans in and says, and he did, or something like that, right? Yeah. I laughed really hard. You just interrupt us if you want to say something.
Yeah, I will.
And I was thinking about, this sounds like a music fan's biggest dream, to make a film about one of your favorite bands. But I have made the experience many times, being a music journalist myself, sometimes it's better not to meet your idols. And it can be the saddest thing ever if you interview somebody and you find out he's a total dick and you wish you'd never met him. Was that ever on your mind, that maybe you destroy your fandom?
No, it wasn't, because I'm honestly, I'm not such a fan that like crazy posters on the wall of Seth knows his birthday. I have a respect for the work. I really, really admire the work. And if you meet someone on that level, I'm very fortunate. I don't really get starstruck. You know, when I'm sitting across from Bruce Springsteen or something, you know, I'm some people would get nervous, and I'm just like, you know, he's just another dude who puts his pants on one leg at a time, and we just have a conversation. And I think perhaps that's why I have success interacting with these people, is because I don't care about their celebrity. I really respect their work, and I try and meet them on that level of like a healthy, respectful reverence, but not being overly starstruck or in awe.
Mm. I mean, you mentioned that in the very beginning, and I'm not sure whether our live stream was working properly. So I think I would love to say that or ask that again, because I read that Robbie kind of saw himself, or like a younger version in you.
That's what he said. Yeah.
What did he see in you? What do you think?
So when I went to see Robbie for the first time and we had our first meeting, you know, my pitch to him was simple, but very compelling and very effective. I just said, listen, I'm going to fucking die before your movie is not amazing. I will give this everything I have as if my life depends on it. You know, he looked at me and he said, you know, I'm such close friends with Scorsese. I know all these wonderful filmmakers. Why should you do this? And what I said back to him was like, listen, this is a film about a highly ambitious young man who, against all odds, is going out into the world to pursue the art form he was born to do, and you know, conquer his dreams. That's my story. I know what that's like, you know, and that resonated for him. And I found out later that through that drive and ambition and burning passion, well, that's who he was when he was 22, 23, 24. That's what he wanted to accomplish.
From what I read, you've done the topics you're interested in as a filmmaker are very broad.
Yeah.
You shot in, let me look that up, in Uganda, I think.
Yeah.
And in Israel. Then you did some First Nations story in Canada. What do all these films have in common? Because there doesn't seem to be like this one topic you're into.
Ultimately, what motivates me is, you know, phenomenal storytelling. That's the continuous thread through all of my work, telling stories that are important. And there's a big difference between making a big rock and roll movie with big executive producers and telling a more intimate, personal family history about a family living in the high Arctic or in Northern Ontario. But at the end of the day, what I'm really motivated by is just making films I would want to watch, and getting to explore worlds and themes that I think are important and interesting to me. And that's what continues to motivate me now as I look at my slate of future projects. Similarly, they are dispersed and all over the thematic map, but what unifies them is this continuous commitment to storytelling, just telling compelling stories about compelling people.
When you do, or when you edit for especially a music documentary, I think rhythm is a very, very important factor. And I mean, it's always important for every film and for every editing, but when it comes to a music documentary, can you tell us a little bit about your concept of rhythm?
Well, yeah. So for a film like this, one of the main characters is the music. And I really design scenes around the music. As a filmmaker, music inspires me almost more than anything. I think that music and film are the same medium. They go together. And so I really just structure this and frame each sequence through the storytelling and through the songs that I pick. And that's the most exciting thing about getting to work on a film like this. There's 65 music cues in this movie. If I was making any other film, that would be impossible. It would cost too much money. But because it's a music film, because people are willing to give their songs for cheap, because they respect Robbie or they love Robbie, I can have 12 Bob Dylan songs and, you know, 30 band songs and Joni Mitchell songs and Howlin' Wolf and Ronnie Hawkins. And as a filmmaker, that's just extraordinary. And I also edited the film. And so having the songs to be able to build the scenes around is like, you know, there's nothing better.
Yeah, we do have 2 compliments and 1 question, and the compliment is great movie, thank you. And I haven't seen the movie yet, but your passion really comes through. I'll get a ticket right away. It's from a person who calls himself not Bob Dylan. And
It's probably
it's still, obviously.
Yeah. And the question from that guy is, Dear Daniel, do you actually make music?
Excellent question. So I'm very much a method director. So when I got this job, I started taking guitar lessons. I've never played music before. I was always a visual artist. You can look at my Instagram. It's full of drawings and paintings and things like this. But when I decided that I was going to make a film about a guitar player, I had to know how to play guitar. So I picked up guitar, and I know very basic, you know, I can play a few chords, and I know a couple plucking and strum patterns, but it's such, it makes me so happy, even though I'll never be good at it. I really love it. And I just feel like it's this pursuit that makes my life so much wealthier. And so that's really been wonderful.
Is it true that you made a comic book at, I don't know, was it college or I don't know where, about the band?
When I was in high school for our art project, I made a comic book about the night they drove Old Dixie down, like a graphic version of it, this sort of thing. And so, you know, again, that song is so visual. It's like a little movie or a little comic. And, you know, it wasn't until I was halfway through this film and I was thinking about why I was so inspired to do this that I thought about that comic from all those years ago. I should go get it and post it on my Instagram or something like this, because it's quite an interesting piece.
Did you show it to Robbie?
I don't know that he's ever seen it. Maybe I'll scan it and send it to him.
And I mean, of course, that's a big decision, how you end your film. And you used that song, The Night That Drove Old Dixie Down. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that decision? Did it always have to be that song?
Well, it's funny. There was one iteration of the film where Dixie was at the very beginning. And I knew that song, for me, it's just the greatest. Levon Helm's singing in that song is the best vocal performance of any rock and roll, anything for me, for my money. It doesn't get better than that. And so I really wanted to play the song in its entirety, which is very hard to do in a movie, to play the full 5 minutes. And so putting it right at the end, it's just this monumental, exciting, triumphant piece to leave audiences dancing and singing in the aisles. And that's really why we decided to end on that note. And it's just, the performance footage from the last Waltz is incredible, and it just seemed to be the right tone to end the movie on.
Tell us a little bit about how you watch the film in movie theaters, because that's something we all, I think, dearly miss right now at the moment. If we had our normal documentary film festival, we would have shown your film at our, how do you call that? Outside. Open air, that's cinema. The word.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We would have celebrated, you know, open air.
Like our Woodstock film last year. Yeah.
And what was it like to see the film with audiences? How did they react? Did people, I don't know, start singing, crying?
Let me think about that. I haven't watched, I'm trying to think of the last time I watched the film with an audience in its entirety. And I think it was only once. I think it was only at TIFF. I haven't seen the film in a long time. You know, for me, I watch it differently. I'm like, you know, I'll watch it and be like, fuck, that should have been 3 frames shorter. And I wish that audio, the fade out should have been different. And for me, it's like, I can't help but see what I would have wanted to change or improve, number one. And a lot of, you know, the film's all nostalgia for me. It's like, I think of that film and I think of, you know, Shane, our assistant editor, and Charlie, our motion graphics artist. Charlie, when he started making the film with me, he's my little cousin. He's 3 or 4 years younger than I am. He just graduated from like business school. And he was like, I want to help you on the movie. And I was like, okay, what can you do? He's like, nothing. I was like, do you know how Photoshop works? Like After Effects, can you do some motion graphics? He's like, what's that? And I just sat him down and all of these tutorials. I was like, learn how to use this software and you'll figure out how to help me with the movie. And he made his own job. He did all the motion graphics in the movie. And now he's like a professional motion graphics artist. Wow. You know, my friend Max, he was working at a production house, got laid off, and he came to help with archives. You know, that's the spirit in which we made the movie. And when I think about it, it's the nostalgia of, you know, my brothers, my own brotherhood that I cultivated with these guys making it, that I am really proud of.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that, whether you were inspired by that, because the band is famous for this beautiful chemistry between these men for so many years until things got a little bit sour. Were you inspired by that? Could you get that into your real life, how you worked on the film? Do you feel inspired to have close friendships? And
what I was inspired by, this film for me, it was not like, I look back on it and it's like fun, wonderful, like I'm nostalgic now and it's great. It was horrible. It was not a fun process. It was a horrible fucking pain in the ass. I was miserable. I had anxiety and stress, and I was like a huge asshole to all of my colleagues. I was so anxious, and my entire life was in pursuit of this one thing. I didn't see my friends. I didn't go to parties. I didn't do anything. I woke up and I went to the office for 7 in the morning and I edited this fucking movie, and that was my mindset for 2 years. And it's horrible. It's not like, that's not pleasant. That's very stressful, but it's like, that's what I had to do to make the movie. Because when you run out of money, but the film's not finished, okay, I have to learn to edit. I'll finish doing it. So that's how it worked. That's how I did it. And, you know, now it's like, you know, who gets like, of course he would do that. Look how successful it was. But when you're making it, you have to have this expectation that maybe no one will see it. Maybe like my parents will love it and be proud of me, but maybe it'll just turn out bad. You don't know how things are going to go. And that's horrible. That's so stressful. And it's like, I'm doing all this, you know, I watch my friends going to law school. They're working hard too, but they're going to be fucking lawyers and doctors and whatever at the end of this. At the end of making this film, it might be nothing. And that is the struggle of making shit, of me being an artist and having to do creative stuff because I have no other skill set. People think it's cool and amazing and everything. And it's like, yeah, but it's also fucking horrible. Because you can spend your life making something for 2 years, and so many filmmakers have done this, and nothing happens. I am just lucky that my thing was like a grand slam, home run. People love it, went all over the world. That's incredible. But when you're in the headspace, the pressure cooker of making the thing, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding being a filmmaker or coming into the business of filmmaking. And the question is, how did you get into filmmaking? When did your passion start, or how did it manifest?
So I've always been creative. I'm a visual artist. I paint and I draw, and I have since I was a little boy. Filmmaking specifically, I came to in high school. I started making movies with my friends when I was in high school and taking little film courses. And then I went to university for a year. And when I was at school in America, I started making real movies, documentaries. And I was like, oh, this is the combination of everything I enjoy doing. I like doing cinematography and editing and going to new places and learning about different cultures and experiencing different parts of the world. That was documentary filmmaking all wrapped up. And then I learned, oh, I can be extra creative. I can do animation. I can learn how to do motion graphics. I can do everything to make my movies really cool. And I just fell in love with the medium. I dropped out of school and I just started making movies. I would go somewhere in the world that interested me. And I would go there for 6 weeks without any idea of what I was going to do there, with a camera on my back. And I would just come away with a story, with a film. So I did that in Israel. I made a film in Uganda, and then I went up to the most northern part of Canada, the top of the Arctic, and I made a film up there. And this was my film school. I would go to somewhere for 5 or 6 weeks, and I would just shoot a bunch of stuff, and I'd figure out what my story is, and I had time. And that's what you don't get when you're doing this professionally. But I had as much time as I needed, and there was no pressure except the pressure I put on myself to make something. And that's really how I started working. And these films were you know, not bad. They'd get into one or two festivals, and I'd get rejected from a whole lot of festivals, including, I'm pretty sure, yours. But they're like badges of honor, you know. It's like it was like you have to take the rejections with pride and just you keep going. And just slowly, with that mindset, I figured out how to turn this thing that I love to do into a job. But it's a struggle. It's hard. It's not like being, you know, an accountant where you get, you know, paid every 2 weeks. It's like, you just got to know if you want to be creative. It's awesome. There's lots of freedom. But it's really scary and hard a lot of the time. I'm in a position where it's like, I have no other skill set. If I couldn't make films or do drawings or paintings or be creative, I don't know what else I have to offer. That's sort of like ingrained into my DNA. But really it was just this idea of just making stuff. And it's really hard to just go finish. People are good at starting shit. It's hard to finish it. And so you just have to follow through and make stuff. And that's what I did enough times that people started paying attention. I was able to get a little bit of money to make stuff.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone who got away? I mean, is there any person you really tried to get for the film, you tried to interview, and he or she just said no?
Well, Bob Dylan, who is
obviously
listening to this, so he can weigh in later on why you want to do it. Who else? Neil Young would have been interesting. That would have been cool because there's a Canadian connection, but that didn't happen. Joni Mitchell was unwell while we were shooting the film, so she couldn't do an interview. But similarly, that would have been cool. Yeah. I think those were my two. Those would have been really exciting for me personally.
Since you mentioned your just 2 or 3 minutes ago, you talked about your parents, that there's always this big, you know, danger that everything you do in the end, it's just going to be your family watching. Sure. And since your dad was one of the starting points for your connection to the band, how did they react when they saw the film? Did they feel like you captured something that probably they've experienced when they were young?
I don't know. Do you want me to ask him? He can come answer that question.
Yeah, sure.
One sec. Kevin?
Wir sehen gerade das Zimmer seines Bruders Zach und hoffen, dass nichts herumliegt, was ihm peinlich ist, was bisher Daniel verdeckt hat.
Dad just stepped out. Dad went to take the dog for a walk. But to answer the question, it's like, you know, these are two people who, I grew up in this community, in this like wealthy Jewish enclave in Toronto, and there's a very specific expectation about sort of the story beats of one's life. Like, you go to the same camps, you go to the same schools, you go to university, you become a lawyer, doctor, accountant, engineer, or business person in real estate or something like this. It's like, those are the tracks. And since I was 4, everyone was going this way, and I was going this completely different direction. One sec. So here. So much fun.
Hello, sir.
You have to try to find this community. So,
hi, how are you?
Welcome to Munich.
Oh, well, welcome. It's so nice to have you in Canada.
Thank you.
So I understand
you had much you liked. Yeah.
You had a question.
The question is, how proud are you? Just talk about how proud you are of the movie and da-da-da-da-da.
Don't leave, Daniel. Don't go away.
I mean, when I was growing up, I absolutely loved the band. It was a huge part of my life growing up. And I'd go on canoe trips with Daniel and the boys, and I would sing many of their songs while we'd be paddling down river. And Daniel would be always curious about, you know, who you singing? What group is that? So we you know, I loved their music. I loved singing their music. I think it sort of grew on Daniel. Mm-hmm. And it became a big part of his life. He was while he was growing up, he was one of the only kids I knew who loved music from the 70s, which is very extraordinary because most kids like more modern day music. But he loved Neil Young, the band, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, all those 60s, 70s kind of groups. So he grew up on that, and that was a big part of his life as well.
And how did you like his movie?
I loved his movie. It was fantastic. When I saw it when we saw it all together as a family,
The rough cut.
well, when we saw it at the Roy Thompson Hall for the opening,
Yeah.
I was in tears because it was very, very emotional. Being there, I mean, it was like, I mean, people said to me, "You must have been very, very proud of your son."
Yeah.
And I turned to them and said, "Well, really, proud isn't the word. It's almost like I'm on another planet. You know what I mean? You're really on a high, you know, a super high, because this is such a rare accomplishment to have Scorsese, Ron Howard, opening at Roy Thompson Hall, the red carpet. It was quite extraordinary, and it's your son. It's like it's amazing. You know, our whole family was proud. We were all there watching, and he thanked my wife and I while he was talking about the film at the beginning, and it was, I was really taken back. I was really taken back, and it was a very, very emotional evening for my wife and I. It was quite something. But I was in tears at one part of the movie, and that was and I know you've discussed it already, and that was at the end when Robbie goes, "I'll meet you at the other side," when he's holding Levon's hand as he's passing away, and "I'll meet you on the other side," and then the movie goes into drove old Dixie down. Yeah. So that whole transition was brilliant. I thought it was just brilliant, and what a way to end the movie. It just gave me goosebumps. That whole end, it was fantastic. I thought it was just a great way to end it. So I loved it. My wife loved it. We both were very, very proud, and it was a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. Well done to you and your education, obviously, of your bringing up of your wonderful son, and showing him great music.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, we're very easygoing people, and when Daniel decided to leave university and not finish, we said, "Well, you better have a plan, and you better come up with an idea here," because, you know, my wife and I were very, you know, you got to finish. When you start something, you finish something, and I realized it wasn't for him, and he realized it wasn't for him, and he did come up. He had an entire plan orchestrated, and it was A, B, and C. And this is what he was going to do. And I said, "Okay, do it. Go for it. You got 2 years," and he did it. And but he does work day and night. He's an incredibly hard worker. He works. He just works. He's a grinder, and he puts his heart and soul into every movie he makes, in my opinion. So we were very, very. Both my wife and I were very, very proud, and we were very. We just wanted him to be relaxed and do what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. You know, we didn't push him to do anything else. We just said, if that's what you want, then go for it. If that's your passion, then go for it. We're not one of these parents that say, "You know what, if it doesn't work, go be a lawyer, go be a doctor." No, that's not. You have to be happy with what you're doing in your life, because life's too short.
Do you do something creative yourself?
Well, not exactly. I was actually...
Are you a lawyer or a doctor?
No, I was in the retail business. My wife and I are both in the retail business, and we have clothing stores. And I sort of fell into it, and I enjoyed it because I'm a business guy. We are very different people in our family. Daniel's the artsy guy, and I'm more businessy, and my wife is a little of both. She's a little business and a little artsy. She's got both sides. So it's interesting, but we are in the retail sector.
So thank you very much.
You're very welcome,
Mr. Roher. I don't know your first name. Kevin. So thank you very much. And is your son still around, or did he just?
I'm going to jump out. He'll jump back in. Great meeting.
He left for a walk.
Hang on one second.
Come back to us. But it was very nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. We have new questions.
We have new questions for you, Daniel.
I've done Q&As dozens of times for this. I think this is the best Q&A that we've ever done.
I was thinking about calling my dad and talking about leaving university, but we have questions from the internet, so.
Yeah, the question is, were you at any point afraid that these people were actually awful once you got to know them?
Well, some of them are,
Okay.
absolutely. And, you know, for me, I look at it like, I've gone and made films with indigenous pygmies in southwestern Uganda, and, you know, it's a different cultural experience, and you just have to be part of that culture and give yourself over to the experience. And it's the same when you're with some very important, big, famous, rich person, and they're an asshole, and you're just like, all right, I guess, you know, that's how this guy is. That's the Kool-Aid he's drinking. You just go along with it, and you do your best. But yeah, it's a kind of annoying. It's a lot more interesting for me when people are amazing and unexpectedly kind and generous.
The next one is a compliment. Thanks for sharing your passion. I'm looking forward to watch the film. I'm of a generation for whom Scorsese's iconic film was part of our coming of age.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you enjoy it. I think it was made for you, and you'll really love it.
Do you think that young audiences will probably get to know the band when they watch your film? Is that something you hope?
Well, the cool kids will, that's for sure. I mean, the band and the music of that generation has a staying power that a lot of top 40 radio hits today I don't think have. So I really hope that the film helps introduce new generations to the music of the band. But you know, a lot of the time, as I'm sure everyone understands, people who seek out the movie, who really love it to go see it, are folks who grew up with the music, who are of that generation. But I feel very strongly, because I'm a young person, that young people can still watch the film and feel nostalgic for a time they were not even a part of.
Mm. Can you tell us about what you're working on right now? Because obviously your range is so wide. So what could it be now?
Well, I can speak in not too much detail about some of the projects I'm working on now, but I have a pretty diverse slate. I'm making this wonderful little short film that's very dear to my heart, that's very much in the spirit of some of my earlier films. It's more of like a human rights personal story about this indigenous woman from Montreal that was adopted into a Jewish family when she was a little girl, and the struggle of that cultural identity. And that film is being directed by my friend Victoria and I, and it's only 9 minutes, but it's a really lovely little film. I'm working on another feature-length film about another rock star who liked this film and wants to have his film made. I'm working on another music show, and I'm working on this really exciting international human rights war and culture film that I can't talk too much about, that is really exciting for me.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work, Daniel. That sounds like the work of 10 years that you've just
listen,
mentioned.
When it rains, it pours, and you know, I just try and stay very, very busy, and I'm very I have many different passions and interests, and I get up in the morning so I can make stuff, and so, you know, sometimes it feels like work, and sometimes this is the worst thing in the world, and sometimes I fucking hate it, and I want to go back to law school or to study rabbinics or to, you know, do something else. But at the end of the day, I love it. I love when I'm actually creating and making stuff and writing my films and editing my films. It's this wonderful, incredible feeling to feel inspired. It's like being in love. That's sort of what it's like. It's like when I feel inspired and I'm making something that really is amazing, that I'm having a good time making. It's like this incredible, euphoric, wonderful feeling that is irreplaceable.
So we love your movies. So.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
We don't want to hate on law school, but don't go.
No.
So thank you very, very much, Daniel. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And it was a pleasure to talk to your dad.
Special guest, Kevin
Say hi
Roher.
to your mom. And we would love to say thank you. And of course, I would like to remind all our beautiful audience members. Vergessen Sie bitte nicht, auch für diesen Film abzustimmen. Er ist natürlich wie alle anderen Filme ja auch nominiert für den Kino-Publikumspreis. They can vote for the Audience Award. Dieser Preis ist gestiftet vom Bayerischen Rundfunk und von Dreisat und Sie können digitalen Applaus für Once Were Brothers verteilen, vergeben. Machen Sie das bitte. Und wir sagen jetzt gute Nacht.
Und gute Nacht. Thank you, Daniel.
A big thank you and bye to Toronto.
Dankeschön.